The afternoon sun cast a warm golden glow over the quiet Thompson neighborhood. The soft hum of distant conversations and the chirp of crickets were the only sounds breaking the peaceful atmosphere. In the backyard of one house, a 2-year-old boy named Noah giggled as he explored the world around him. His blonde hair fluttered in the breeze as he crawled through the grass, his bright blue eyes filled with wonder. His mother, Emily, occasionally glanced out the kitchen window, watching her son with a smile, enjoying the simple joy that only children can experience. Little did she know, this peaceful afternoon was about to change. On the other side of the fence, hidden in the shadows of the trees, a pair of dark eyes watched Noah. It was a pit bull, a scruffy dog with a dirty coat and an aura of exhaustion. Its body was thin, its ribs showing, and its face scarred from a hard life. But there was something deeper in its eyes, a longing for connection, for peace. Noah, innocent and trusting, didn't recognize the dog's vulnerability. Instead, he noticed the pit bull peering through the fence and broke into a wide grin, clapping his hands in excitement. To him, this wasn't a dangerous animal. It was just another friend to discover. Noah stood up unsteadily and took a few steps toward the fence. He laughed and pointed at the dog, as if showing it to the world. Without hesitation, he reached his tiny hand through the slats of the fence, extending it toward the animal. The pit bull hesitated, sniffing the air cautiously. It was unsure, still frightened and exhausted. But then, slowly, it stepped forward, inching closer to Noah. It wasn't an aggressive move, but a tentative approach, driven by some inner instinct to come closer. Noah, unaware of the dog's past, giggled louder. He continued to extend his hand as if they had been friends for years. The pit bull sniffed the air one last time, then lowered its head, cautiously pressing its nose to Noah's tiny fingers. Noah's face lit up with a delighted smile, and he clapped his hands in joy. It was as if he had just made a new best friend, no matter how rough or unfamiliar the dog appeared. Noah's curiosity soon turned to the open door of the house behind him. He looked at the dog, as if inviting it to come inside. The pit bull hesitated, looking between the boy and the door. Something in Noah's trusting expression seemed to pull at the dog's heart. In a slow motion, the dog stepped forward, pushing against the fence to find an opening. Finally, it squeezed through a small gap and entered the yard. Noah, excited, giggled again and moved toward the house, ensuring the dog followed. The pit bull silently trailed behind, its powerful frame contrasting with the neat suburban home. Noah's tiny feet patted across the soft rug of the living room as he entered, the dog behind him. Everything felt natural, as if it was meant to happen. But as Noah reached the center of the room, the peaceful atmosphere shifted. A scream, sharp and terrified, cut through the calm. Emily, hearing the scream, rushed out of the kitchen, her eyes wide with horror when she saw her son standing near the filthy pit bull. Her heart raced, and panic set in. This wasn't how she imagined the afternoon would go. Her first instinct was to grab Noah and run, but she froze, overwhelmed by fear and confusion. Should she call for help? Her instincts screamed to protect her child, but another part of her whispered to wait, to see what happened next. The pit bull remained still, watching Noah with exhausted eyes. It didn't growl or show aggression. It simply stared, as if it had chosen not to be a threat. Emily couldn't understand why it wasn't being aggressive. What was happening? The tension in the room grew thick, and Emily could only wonder what would come next. Why had this dog appeared at their doorstep? As Emily stood frozen in the doorway, her heart raced and her breath quickened. The moment stretched on, and her eyes remained locked on the pit bull. Noah, unaware of the tension, continued to smile, his small fingers resting on the dog's fur. He saw the animal as just another friend to love, while Emily's instincts screamed to protect him. But as she observed the dog's calm posture, her fear began to waver. The pit bull wasn't acting aggressively. It was still, almost peaceful, as if it had made a silent agreement with Noah. Michael, standing next to her, was equally tense, his body rigid. Despite every muscle telling him to pull Noah away, he hesitated. There was something different about this moment, something he hadn't expected. The dog's calmness, its deep breaths, made him question his earlier assumptions. It wasn't angry or threatening. It seemed resigned, even peaceful in Noah's presence. The silence between Emily and Michael was heavy, filled with a growing sense of confusion. Should they trust their instincts, or was this dog truly different from what they had feared? Noah's laughter filled the silence, his joy palpable. Emily's mind raced, her protective nature battling against the strange trust Noah seemed to have for the dog. As she watched him, she realized that Noah had already made up his mind. The pit bull, despite its rough exterior, was just a friend in his eyes. Emily and Michael exchanged a look, a flicker of understanding passing between them. Despite the warnings they had heard about stray animals and the unpredictable nature of pit bulls, there was something undeniable about the connection forming in front of them. Noah's next move took them both by surprise. With no fear, he stepped closer and wrapped his arms around the dog's thick neck, pulling it into a tight hug. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Terror gripped her as she wondered if the dog might snap, but instead, the pit bull let out a deep sigh, its massive head sinking and its body lowering to the ground. It surrendered to Noah's affection, as though it had been waiting for this moment of trust. Michael, still frozen, watched in disbelief. The dog, once a symbol of potential danger, had chosen to submit, to accept the love Noah was offering. It was no longer just an animal. Its tense body had melted into the boy's embrace, and in that moment, Michael felt a shift within himself. His fear began to fade, replaced by awe and the hope that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the danger they had feared. Emily's grip on the counter loosened, but her mind remained unsettled. The fear still lingered, yet she couldn't ignore the bond forming between Noah and the dog. This moment wasn't just about protecting her child. It was about realizing that sometimes the most unexpected connections could be the most beautiful. The dog, with its weary eyes, had become more than just a stray. It was part of their lives now, and in that moment, Noah had chosen it. And the dog had chosen Noah in return. As the tension in the room eased, Emily and Michael exchanged another glance. The weight of the moment hung between them, and without words, they understood that something had shifted. This wasn't just a random encounter, it was the beginning of something new. They were no longer afraid, they were connected, and that connection was enough. The fears, the doubts, had faded away, leaving behind the quiet certainty that they weren't alone. They had each other, and in that, they found peace. The silence in the room hung heavily as Emily and Michael stood side by side, watching Noah and the pit bull. Despite the chaos of emotions swirling within them, there was an undeniable connection forming between their son and this unexpected visitor. It wasn't just the dog's presence that made them pause. It was the way Noah's pure heart had already embraced the animal, and how the dog, despite its intimidating appearance, had responded with an almost gentle acceptance. Emily felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her, but there was something else, too. Something she hadn't expected. A soft pull in her chest, a sensation that the fear she'd held onto so tightly might not be necessary anymore. Noah continued to sit beside the pit bull, his small hand brushing the dog's fur as he hummed a soft tune. The scene before Emily and Michael felt surreal. Their minds were still processing the wild turn of events, but their hearts were starting to let go of the tension they'd held since the dog first appeared at the fence. This wasn't the picture of danger they had imagined. Noah's trust was so pure, so unwavering, and the dog had shown no signs of aggression. Instead, it lay quietly, as though the weight of the world had been lifted from its shoulders. The rhythm of its breathing, slow and steady, contrasted so sharply with the racing thoughts in their minds. Emily couldn't help but wonder, had this pit bull been searching for something more than just food or shelter? Could it be that, in its own way, it had found what it needed here, in this house, with this family? Michael, who had initially been skeptical about letting the dog stay, now found himself struggling with his own emotions. Every instinct he had told him to remain cautious, to make sure they didn't rush into something they weren't ready for. But watching Noah so freely love the dog, watching the bond form between them with every passing second, began to chip away at his doubts. He stood frozen, watching the dog's eyes flicker in and out of a deep, quiet sleep. There was a serenity in the way the dog lay there, as though it had finally found a place to rest, a place where it wasn't an outsider. Michael felt his heart soften just a little. Maybe this wasn't such a bad thing after all. Emily finally broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do we do now?" she asked, not just of Michael, but of the situation they had suddenly found themselves in. She was still unsure, still afraid of what could happen. They didn't know anything about this dog, where it had come from, or what it had been through. But looking at Noah, so peacefully sitting next to the animal, it was hard to imagine the worst-case scenarios they had feared just hours ago. She swallowed hard, her thoughts racing. Could this be a sign? Was the dog meant to be here? Was it simply lost, or was there something more? Emily's heart wavered as she waited for Michael's response. The uncertainty that had gripped them both earlier now seemed to dissolve in the presence of their son's unshakable faith in this creature. Michael met her gaze, his expression softening, though his mind was still clouded with caution. "We can't just let him stay here without knowing anything about him," he murmured. The words felt heavier than he expected. He didn't want to risk their family's safety, but the longer he watched the two of them together, the more he realized that there was a deeper layer to this moment than he had initially understood. Perhaps it wasn't about knowing everything about the dog's past. Maybe it was about what the dog represented now. Emily nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving the pit bull as it rested beside Noah. "I know. But look at him, Michael," she said, her voice tinged with a mixture of wonder and hesitation. "He's not acting like I thought he would. He's not attacking or being defensive. He's just here with Noah." Her voice trailed off as she processed her own thoughts. The dog hadn't shown any signs of hostility. Instead, it seemed exhausted, worn down by its past struggles. Emily's heart ached as she watched it, feeling a deep sense of empathy for the animal. It wasn't just a stray, it was a soul in need of healing, just like they all were. For a moment, Michael stood silent, staring at the dog. He had always prided himself on being a logical person, on making decisions based on facts and not emotions. But what was happening now, this quiet, peaceful moment, was challenging everything he had ever believed about how things should unfold. He was used to control, to following a clear path. But this was uncertain, messy, and unplanned. Yet somehow it felt right. Slowly, he moved closer to the pit bull, his hand hovering in the air, unsure of what would happen if he reached out. The dog shifted its weight slightly, its eyes flickering up at him for a brief moment, but it didn't react with hostility. Instead, there was a subtle sense of surrender in the way the dog lowered its head. Michael took a slow breath and gently touched the dog's head. The dog remained still, its fur soft under his fingers, its large body relaxed. Emily watched the exchange, her breath catching in her throat. She had never seen Michael like this before. He was always the one who played it safe, the one who thought things through before acting. But here, in this moment, There was something unspoken between them, something that felt like a shared understanding. Maybe they didn't need to know everything about the dog. Maybe it was enough that Noah had chosen him, that the dog had chosen them in return. Noah, completely unaware of the gravity of the situation, continued to hum softly as he stroked the dog's fur. His little fingers danced across the dog's coat, a gesture so simple and pure that it made Emily's heart ache with tenderness. This was more than just a boy and a dog. It was a bond forged in the quiet spaces between words, in the trust they had given each other without hesitation. Emily let out a shaky breath and stepped closer to Michael. Maybe we should give him a chance, she said, her voice still uncertain but softer now. Maybe he's not just a stray. Maybe he's meant to be here, with us. Michael didn't answer right away. He looked at the dog, then at Noah, and finally, at Emily. There was a long pause, and then, with a slow exhale, he nodded. Okay, he said quietly. Let's give him a chance. But we set boundaries. We keep an eye on him, and if anything feels off, we'll figure it out then. The decision was made, tentative, but with a newfound trust in what felt like an unspoken promise. The dog had made it into their home, not with force, but with a quiet request for acceptance. And in that moment, they had chosen to listen. Emily let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "We'll take it slow," she said, her voice more steady now. "One step at a time." As she spoke, she looked at Noah, who was already making himself comfortable next to the dog, his eyes half closed in contentment. For the first time since the dog had appeared, Emily felt a sense of peace settle in her chest. It wasn't about knowing everything or having all the answers. It was about the connection that had already begun to form between them, a connection that didn't need to be explained, just felt. As the evening wore on, the tension in the house began to ease. Noah and the dog stayed close to one another, a picture of quiet companionship. Emily and Michael exchanged glances, their hearts still heavy with the weight of their decision, but also lighter than they had felt in hours. Perhaps they hadn't chosen the dog. Perhaps in some mysterious way the dog had chosen them. As the night wore on, the tension in the house eased, replaced by a quiet, tentative peace. Emily and Michael sat on the couch, their eyes occasionally shifting to the Pitbull who now rested at their feet. Noah, unaware of the emotional weight around him, lay curled up on the floor, his small body pressed against the dog's fur. The two of them, Noah and the Pitbull, formed an unspoken bond in the stillness of the room. Emily watched them, her heart a mix of wonder and disbelief. Just hours ago, she had been filled with fear, unsure of what to do. Now, seeing Noah's peaceful expression, she felt something had changed within herself, too. For the first time that day, Emily relaxed. She glanced at Michael, who was still watching the dog, but with a softened gaze. He wasn't as tense as before, and though his protective instincts remained, he seemed more open to the idea that this pit bull wasn't the threat they had feared. In their silent exchange, they both understood. It wasn't about fear anymore. It was about acceptance. Yet they knew the decision wasn't final. The unknowns about the dog's past still lingered, and they had agreed to give it time, to wait and see. Emily couldn't help but wonder about the dog's past. What if he had been abandoned or hurt? She couldn't imagine the hardships he might have faced. Yet, there was something in the dog's eyes, a mix of weariness and hope, that spoke to her. It wasn't just food or shelter that had driven him to their door. There was something deeper, a connection with Noah. Emily believed in signs, in the universe guiding people and animals together when needed most. In that quiet living room, she felt that this pit bull had been brought to them for a reason. The night passed in a surreal quiet. Noah drifted to sleep with his tiny hand resting on the dog's fur. Emily watched him, her heart swelling with pride and awe. How could a child so young, so innocent, trust so deeply in a creature so different from him. Noah had seen the Pitbull as a friend from the beginning, and the dog had accepted him in return. Emily thought back to her own fears about trusting the dog. Now, seeing their gentle interaction, it felt almost foolish to have doubted. Surrounded by the quiet rise and fall of the dog's breath and Noah's gentle snores, Emily realized that trust had already settled between them all. Unspoken, but undeniable. Michael, who had been silent for a while, shifted in his seat. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I keep thinking about how scared I was when he first showed up. But now," looking at them, he looked at Noah and the pit bull, sharing a quiet moment of comfort. "It doesn't feel right to think of him as a threat anymore. He's part of our family." Emily smiled softly, warmed by his words. It wasn't just that the dog had earned their trust. It was that they had all changed. The fear had melted away, replaced by an understanding they hadn't expected. They had opened their hearts to something new, something they hadn't planned for, and in doing so, they had found peace they didn't know they needed. As the evening wore on and the shadows grew longer, Emily quietly made her way to the kitchen to prepare a light snack. She smiled to herself, unable to shake the sense of gratitude she felt. The day had begun with expectations of a normal Saturday, but it had turned into something far more extraordinary. She had anticipated worry, uncertainty, but instead she found contentment. Though part of her still wondered about the dog's history, a deeper part of her trusted this new family member. They had made the right choice. When Emily returned to the living room, she found Michael dozing on the couch, his hand resting gently on the dog's back. Noah was still asleep, peacefully curled beside the dog. The room felt different now, warmer, fuller. The presence of the dog had brought something new to their lives, a sense of connection that hadn't been there before. Emily sat quietly beside Michael, soaking in the comfort of the moment. In the stillness, she felt the weight of the decision they had made. It wasn't just about the dog. It was about the family they had become. In the days to follow, Emily and Michael would continue to observe the dog, watching how he adjusted to their home and their lives. But in that moment, as they sat together on the couch, Emily knew that whatever the future held, they had already taken the first step towards something beautiful. A family bound not only by blood, but by love and trust, a bond strengthened over time. And somehow, in the quiet of that night, everything had already fallen into place. The days following the dog's arrival in their home were quiet, but not without their share of reflection. Emily and Michael had learned something about themselves, something they hadn't expected. In a way, the pit bull had found them just as much as they had found him. Their initial fears had melted away in the face of Noah's unwavering trust, and in turn, they found themselves accepting the dog, Hank, as Noah had named him, with a sense of calm they hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just the dog's presence that had shifted their family dynamic. It was the slow, gentle way he had integrated into their lives, earning their trust, piece by piece. Hank was no longer just a stray who had wandered into their yard. He had become part of their story. Noah, with his innocent heart and boundless curiosity, was the one who had brought the most comfort in those early days. His interactions with Hank were simple but profound. The two of them had formed a bond that seemed almost fated. Each morning, Noah would run to Hank's side as soon as he woke up, his small hands reaching out to stroke the dog's fur with a tenderness that belied his age. Hank would lift his head slowly, as though recognizing the boy's presence, before Noah had even called his name. The way the dog responded to Noah was a stark contrast to the wariness he had displayed when he first entered their home. Now, Hank seemed to take solace in Noah's touch, leaning into the boy's gentle strokes, his eyes soft and trusting. It was as if Hank had spent years wandering in search of this kind of bond, one that asked for nothing in return except companionship. Emily couldn't help but smile when she saw the two of them together. There was something incredibly pure about the way Noah loved Hank. It was unconditional, untainted by the world's skepticism or fear. As she watched them, she realized that Noah's heart had already embraced the dog completely, and now it was her turn to do the same. It wasn't an easy process. She still had questions, still wondered about the past Hank had left behind, and whether they were truly ready for the responsibility of taking care of him. But with each passing day, those questions became less important. What mattered more was the undeniable bond that had formed between her son and the dog, and how it had begun to shape their family. Michael, too, had started to let go of the reservations that had plagued him at first. He'd spent most of his life sticking to what was predictable, what was safe. But Hank's arrival had challenged that mindset. It wasn't just the dog itself, it was the way he had integrated into their lives so seamlessly. There was no struggle, no fight for dominance. Instead, Hank had simply entered their home and made himself a part of their world. There was something deeply humbling about that, and Michael found himself slowly warming to the idea that they were all capable of opening their hearts in ways they hadn't thought possible. Hank wasn't just a stray dog. He was a living reminder that sometimes the most unexpected things could bring the most joy. Despite the comfort that had begun to settle over the house, there were moments when doubt crept in. Emily would sometimes catch herself staring at Hank, wondering about his past, about how he had come to be so broken and tired when he first arrived. There were times when she would lie awake at night, listening to the steady rhythm of Hank's breathing, and wonder if the dog would ever fully let go of the pain that had been etched into his body. She wanted to believe that Hank had found peace, that he had found a family that would love him and care for him without question. But those old fears still lingered, just beneath the surface, waiting to rise up again. Michael, too, found himself grappling with the weight of responsibility. He had grown up with a healthy skepticism of people who took in stray animals. They never knew what they were getting into, and in his mind, that was a risk he didn't want to take. But over time, Michael's view had started to shift. He watched Hank grow more comfortable with each passing day, watched the dog become more confident and more at ease in their presence. Hank had started to trust them, and with that trust came a newfound sense of responsibility. It was no longer just about taking care of a dog. It was about being there for him, helping him heal, and giving him a sense of belonging. Michael had spent years guarding his heart from things he couldn't control, but now, with Hank in their home, he found himself learning to embrace the unknown. One evening after dinner, Emily and Michael sat down together on the couch, their eyes following Hank as he lay on the rug near Noah. The dog was sprawled out on his side, his breathing slow and steady, his eyes half closed. Noah, who had been playing with his toy cars on the floor, suddenly stopped and crawled over to Hank. He reached out, running his small hands over the dog's back in the same soothing way he had done for days. Emily and Michael exchanged a quiet glance. There was no need for words. They both knew what this moment meant. Hank was no longer just a guest in their home. He was part of the family, and they had accepted him as such. The doubt, the uncertainty, they had all but disappeared. In the days that followed, Emily and Michael continued to observe Hank, learning more about him with each passing moment. They saw how he reacted to certain sounds, how he reacted when Noah cried, how he would nudge his head into their laps when he needed affection. Hank had already begun to show them the kind of dog he was, loyal, gentle, and loving, despite everything he had been through. And with each day that passed, Emily and Michael found themselves growing closer to Hank, learning to love him not just because he had chosen them, but because he had become a part of their story. By the end of the week, they had made a decision. They weren't just going to take care of Hank, they were going to make him a permanent part of their family. The choice wasn't a difficult one, though it had taken time to reach. In the quiet moments, in the way Hank watched over Noah and rested by their side, they saw everything they needed to see. This dog had a place with them, and they had a place with him. No more uncertainty, no more second-guessing. Hank wasn't just a stray, he was home. As they sat together that evening, Noah nestled in their arms, Hank lying contentedly at their feet, Emily realized something profound. Love didn't have to be complicated. Sometimes it was as simple as allowing yourself to trust, to accept, and to love without reservation. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the warmth of their home, Emily knew that they had done the right thing. They had chosen to open their hearts, and in doing so, they had found something far more precious than they could have ever imagined. A family, complete with their new, loyal companion, Hank. In the weeks following Hank's arrival, the dynamics of the house gradually shifted. What had begun as a hesitant decision, filled with fear and uncertainty, evolved into something more meaningful. Emily and Michael, initially unsure about welcoming a stray Pitbull, now found themselves embracing Hank's presence. The dog had quietly earned his place not through grand gestures, but through his calm demeanor and subtle acts that spoke of his desire for belonging. In turn, their lives began to change in ways they hadn't anticipated, and they started to realize that this path was one they were meant to walk. For Emily, the realization that Hank was more than just a dog, a companion, a protector, and a friend, came slowly. At first, her protective instincts kept her on edge, particularly as Noah bonded with Hank. Emily wanted to be certain that the dog, with his unknown past, would not pose a danger to her child. But over time, as she watched Hank interact with Noah, she saw a kindness in him. Hank instinctively positioned himself between Noah and any potential threat, offering a quiet form of protection. It wasn't loud or demanding, but it was the kind of safety Emily hadn't known she needed. Hank's calmness, even in moments of uncertainty, impressed her. She realized that while she had always tried to control situations and emotions, Hank found peace in simply accepting things as they were. His example changed how Emily approached life, teaching her to let go of the need for control and embrace the present. Michael's transformation was more subtle, but just as impactful. He had always been a planner, someone who needed to control the outcome of any situation. Hank's arrival initially stirred anxiety about the dog's unpredictable past, but over time, Michael grew more comfortable. Hank's calm nature, his ability to simply be present, began to soften Michael's rigid boundaries. The dog didn't need to overthink or plan, he just lived in the moment. Michael realized that some things in life couldn't be planned, and sometimes embracing the unknown was the best way forward. Hank had subtly taught him that. The most significant change, however, was in Noah. What began as a tentative friendship with Hank had blossomed into a deep, unshakable bond. From the moment they met, Noah had never been afraid of Hank. To him, the dog wasn't a stray or a pit bull with a reputation. He was simply a friend, someone to love and share his toys with. Every morning, Noah rushed to Hank's side, eager to spend time with him. He would curl up beside the dog, wrapping his small arms around Hank's thick neck. Hank, in turn, always knew how to respond, whether by lying beside Noah as he played or offering comfort when Noah needed it. Their connection was natural, intuitive, and deep. Watching this bond between their son and Hank, Emily and Michael were amazed. It transcended words and logic. Noah saw Hank as a protector, and Hank saw Noah as someone to care for, someone to watch over. Their relationship was pure and unconditional, and the connection between them felt destined. It was as if fate had brought them together, or perhaps something even more mysterious was at work. As weeks turned into months, Emily and Michael came to accept that Hank had become a permanent part of their family. It wasn't something they had planned, but they couldn't imagine their lives without him. Hank had filled a space they hadn't even known was empty. He had become more than just a pet. He was a member of their family, a constant presence in their home. One evening, as Emily sat by the window, watching the sunset, she reflected on how much had changed. Their home was no longer just filled with the sounds of daily life, but with love and trust. Hank had found a home, but in doing so, he had given them something invaluable: the ability to let go of their fears, to trust in the unknown, and to embrace unconditional love. Emily smiled softly, feeling a deep sense of peace. They had all come so far, and with Hank by their side, they knew that no matter what challenges the future might bring, they would face them together, as a family. The months following Hank's adoption marked a transformative journey for Emily, Michael, and their family. What began as a spontaneous decision soon became a beautiful shared experience, reshaping their views on life, trust, and family. The bond between Noah and Hank, though simple in its foundation, was the heart of it all. Noah's innocent trust in the dog, untouched by the fears that Emily and Michael initially felt, allowed them to see Hank in a new light, not as a stray needing a home, but as a loyal companion who quietly integrated into their lives. Hank, over time, took on the role of protector. He adapted to the family's routines, the early mornings, the quiet afternoons, and the evenings spent together. His presence, once something they thought about constantly, became a comforting constant they relied on. Hank always positioned himself near the front door when the family was away or stayed close to Noah, watching over him with a quiet vigilance that reassured Emily and Michael. At first, Emily had doubts. She wondered if Hank could be trusted, if he could truly be gentle with Noah. Yet, Hank answered her questions in the most natural way possible. Despite the chaos of everyday life, Hank remained calm, never showing any signs of aggression. Emily came to understand that Hank was not defined by his past, but by the dog he had become, one who had opened his heart to their family. Michael's transformation was more gradual. Raised with the belief that dogs, especially strays, were unpredictable and potentially dangerous, he had a guarded approach toward Hank. However, as Hank proved himself day by day, Michael began to let go of his fears. The dog's quiet nature and consistent loyalty taught him that sometimes it was okay to trust even in uncertain circumstances. Hank had become a symbol of loyalty, resilience, and emotional connection, showing Michael that life's greatest lessons often come when you least expect them. As seasons passed, Emily often reflected on the profound changes in their family. The house had gone from uncertainty to a home filled with warmth, love, and laughter. She watched as Noah and Hank shared moments of pure joy, with Noah climbing all over the dog or falling asleep with his hand resting on Hank's back. These moments cemented Emily's belief that Hank was more than just a pet. He had become a cornerstone of their family. Still, old doubts lingered. Emily couldn't fully ignore Hank's past or the scars he bore, both physical and emotional. She sometimes wondered if he would ever fully heal from whatever hardships he had endured. But with time, those worries began to fade. Hank had not become a part of their family because of his past, but because of what he had chosen to do once he found them. He had given them peace, security, and a sense of belonging. One evening, after a long day, Emily sat on the porch with Hank by her side. The sun set behind them, casting long shadows across the yard as the evening air cooled. Hank sat beside her, vigilant yet calm, his body resting against the railing. Emily ran her fingers through his fur, feeling the warmth against the crisp evening air. For the first time in months, she felt completely at ease. She realized that this comfort, this peace, was what Hank had brought into their lives. He had allowed them to simply be, to feel safe in the present, and to trust that whatever came next, they would face it together. Later that night, as Noah drifted to sleep with Hank curled up at his feet, Emily and Michael exchanged a quiet, knowing glance. No words were needed. They both understood, with absolute certainty, that they had found something in Hank that neither had expected. A bond built not on logic or understanding, but on trust and acceptance. By opening their hearts to him, they had discovered a deeper connection to one another and to themselves. Hank had found his place with them, and in return, Emily and Michael realized that he had given them more than they could have imagined. Together, they were no longer just a family. They were a team, bound by love, loyalty, and a shared understanding that no matter what challenges they faced, they would always have each other. The story of Hank and his adoption by Emily, Michael, and their son Noah holds a deep, humanistic significance that transcends the simple narrative of rescuing a stray dog. At its core, the story is about the transformative power of trust, love, and the unexpected bonds that can form between individuals, whether human or animal. Hank, the pit bull, arrives at the family's doorstep worn down by his past, but finds healing through the unconditional love and acceptance he receives from Noah, who offers him pure, unguarded trust from the start. In turn, the family, particularly Emily and Michael, learns to let go of their initial fears and prejudices, embracing Hank not as a symbol of the unknown, but as a member of their family. The story highlights the importance of overcoming fear and letting go of preconceived notions in order to truly experience the depth of connection and companionship that can enrich our lives. It also underscores how love, in its simplest form, can heal even the deepest scars, whether they are on a dog's body or in the hearts of the people who choose to open theirs. The tale is a reminder that sometimes the greatest gifts come in unexpected forms, and it is through vulnerability and trust that we find the true meaning of family and belonging. It's a beautiful testament to the idea that, no matter our past, we all have the capacity for redemption, love, and transformation when given the chance. Share your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another amazing story. Together, we can shine a light on the power of doing what's right. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.